Emily stood behind the counter of her modest restaurant, surveying the half-empty tables with a mix of frustration and determination. The evening had started slow, and it seemed destined to stay that way. The clinking of cutlery and the distant hum of conversation were comforting, but the room lacked the buzz that came with a packed house. Her dream of owning a successful restaurant was hanging by a thread, and Emily felt the weight of each empty chair like a personal failure. Yet, she kept her head high, forcing a smile for the few diners who seemed to enjoy her cooking. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat on a battered leather couch in the waiting room of a small theater, his head resting against the wall in resignation. The audition he'd given earlier felt mediocre, and as he watched other actors come and go, his hope dwindled. It had been years since he'd left his hometown for a shot at stardom, but the path to success felt more like a series of dead ends. Despite the fatigue in his eyes, Daniel's resolve remained intact. Giving up wasn't an option, not yet. Later that night, Emily closed up the restaurant alone, turning off the lights and locking the door with a sigh. The day had been long, but the kitchen had always been her sanctuary, a place where her passion for food made all her struggles seem worthwhile. At that same moment, Daniel walked home under the dim streetlights, rehearsing lines to distract himself from the looming doubt. The city felt cold and indifferent, but there was a flicker of hope in his chest, one that refused to be extinguished. Unbeknownst to both of them, fate had a surprise in store, one that would change everything. The community event was in full swing, a lively mix of laughter, music, and the enticing aromas of street food. Emily, stationed behind her modest food stand, greeted each customer with a practiced smile. Her anxiety simmered beneath the surface, driven by the mounting pressure to attract more patrons to her struggling restaurant. Tonight, her mission was clear: make a memorable impression one dish at a time. Daniel, in search of distraction, had volunteered to help at the event. Dressed in casual jeans and a faded jacket, he moved between the stalls, setting up tables and chatting with performers. His latest audition had ended with yet another vague promise of a callback, leaving him with a familiar sense of frustration. The fare was a welcome change of pace, a chance to escape the weight of his unfulfilled dreams, if only for a few hours. Drawn by the scent of freshly baked focaccia, Daniel found himself at Emily's booth. She was busy serving customers, her hands moving with the precision of a seasoned chef. Intrigued, Daniel reached for a sample of her bruschetta, but in his eagerness, he accidentally knocked the small plate from the counter, scattering tomatoes and basil across the ground. "Whoa, sorry about that," Daniel exclaimed, his face flushing with embarrassment. Emily looked up, momentarily startled, before breaking into a genuine laugh, the kind she hadn't felt in weeks. "No harm done," she reassured, offering him a new piece. "I've dealt with worse in the kitchen." Daniel chuckled, grateful for her humor. "Glad to hear it. I'm Daniel, by the way, an actor, or trying to be." Emily's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Emily?" "Chef, trying not to be a starving artist," she quipped. Their brief exchange was filled with warmth and unexpected understanding, a connection that seemed almost too natural. As Daniel walked away, he turned back once more, his gaze lingering on Emily's smile. For the first time in a while, both felt the faint stirrings of hope, unaware of how profoundly their lives were about to intertwine. The weeks that followed brought unexpected moments of joy. Emily and Daniel kept finding themselves in each other's orbit, as if the universe itself conspired to bring them closer. It began with casual texts. Daniel would ask Emily for a recipe suggestion, often adding a self-deprecating joke about his lack of cooking skills. Emily responded with playful sarcasm, appreciating the lightness he brought to her days. One evening, as Emily was closing the restaurant, her phone buzzed with a message: "Long day. Any chance I could trade my tragic cooking for some of yours tonight?" Emily hesitated briefly, but then agreed, intrigued by the comfort she felt in his presence. Daniel arrived shortly after, bringing a bottle of cheap wine as a peace offering. Emily laughed at his choice, mockingly inspecting the label. "Bold selection," she teased. "It pairs well with desperation." They cooked side by side, Emily guiding Daniel through the simple preparation of pasta with pesto. Their movements were synchronized, a natural flow that mirrored the growing ease of their friendship. As they worked, Daniel opened up about his acting struggles, sharing tales of auditions gone wrong. "You wouldn't believe how many times I've had to act like a tree," he joked, prompting a burst of laughter from Emily. But as the night wore on, the mood shifted to something deeper. Emily confided in Daniel about the restaurant's financial troubles, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fooling myself," she admitted. Daniel's response was immediate and sincere. "You're not. You're just brave enough to try, which is more than most people can say." There was a silent understanding that settled between them, a bond not just of friendship, but of shared ambition and unspoken fears. It was clear that what they had was becoming more than just a passing connection. As Daniel left that night, he paused at the door, turning back to offer a warm smile. "See you soon, chef," he said softly, and Emily's heart flickered with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The shift from friendship to romance was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The playful texts became more frequent, and their evening conversations stretched longer into the night. There was a quiet warmth in the way they lingered in each other's presence, like an unspoken promise waiting to be fulfilled. One chilly evening, Daniel invited Emily to a small independent play in which he was performing. It wasn't a big production, but it was a role he was passionate about, and Emily sensed the importance it held for him. She sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Daniel as he delivered each line with raw emotion. For the first time, she saw not just the struggling actor, but a man driven by an all-consuming passion. After the play, Emily waited for Daniel backstage, beaming with pride. "You were incredible," she said earnestly, her eyes shining. Caught in the rush of adrenaline, Daniel pulled her into a spontaneous hug, his heart pounding as he held her a little longer than expected. The following weekend, Emily decided to cook a special dinner for Daniel at her apartment. She prepared a carefully crafted menu, putting her heart into every dish. The meal was served by candlelight, the flickering flames casting a warm glow that mirrored the tension building between them. As they cleared the dishes, Daniel reached for Emily's hand, his gaze serious but tender. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice low and uncertain. "I've been trying to keep this just as friendship, but the truth is, I care about you more than I intended to." Emily's response was wordless. She leaned forward, pressing her lips gently against his in a kiss that was soft, tentative, yet filled with all the emotions they had held back. It wasn't a moment of passion alone, it was a moment of realization, of two hearts finding the courage to embrace what was inevitable. As they pulled apart, Daniel whispered, "So what now?" Emily smiled, her eyes both bright and unsure. "We try," she said simply, and for the first time they both felt that maybe, just maybe, love was a risk worth taking. Emily's restaurant was thriving, and for the first time she felt a sense of momentum. The glowing review from a renowned food critic had brought a wave of new customers eager to taste her culinary creations. The restaurant hummed with energy, tables constantly filled, and Emily's passion was rekindled. Yet, the increasing demands also meant longer hours, more responsibilities, and less time for herself. And for Daniel. Meanwhile, Daniel's acting career was finally gaining traction. His role in a popular local production had earned him recognition from key figures in the industry. It wasn't a breakthrough role, but it was significant enough to open new doors. Daniel's days were filled with rehearsals, networking events, and occasional callbacks for bigger projects. Each small victory felt like a step closer to his dreams, but also a step further from the easy, carefree moments he and Emily had once shared. Their relationship, once a source of comfort, now bore the weight of two growing careers. Late-night phone calls became increasingly rare, often cut short by exhaustion or urgent responsibilities. When they managed to meet, it was with a sense of urgency, as if they were trying to make up for lost time. On one such evening, Emily prepared a simple dinner at her place. They sat in relative silence, both weary from their respective worlds. "Feels like we're always racing against something," Emily finally said, breaking the silence. Her tone was a mix of frustration and vulnerability. Daniel reached for her hand across the table. "I know. But we've come so far, Emily. We can't let it slip away now." She nodded, trying to muster a smile. "It's just hard. Balancing everything." As the evening wore on, the unspoken tension lingered between them. They still loved each other deeply, but the pressures of ambition began to take their toll. Each was driven by a desire to succeed, but in doing so, they were slowly losing the connection that had once felt so effortless. The seeds of uncertainty were planted, casting shadows over a love that had seemed unbreakable. It was early morning when Daniel's phone rang. He squinted at the unfamiliar number, debating whether to answer. But something urged him to pick up. On the other end, a voice brimming with enthusiasm spoke. "Daniel, this is the opportunity you've been waiting for, a major role in a Hollywood film. You'd be perfect for it." Daniel's heart pounded as he listened, barely able to process the details. This was it, the break he had been dreaming of for years. But then the voice shifted to a more serious tone. "There's one condition. We need total commitment." No distractions, including personal ones? As the call ended, Daniel sat in stunned silence. The excitement that had filled his chest was quickly replaced by a sinking realization. He knew what no distractions meant. It was code for ending his relationship with Emily. The production company backing the film was also one of the key investors supporting Emily's restaurant. His dreams and her future had become deeply entangled, and now they threatened to tear each other apart. For days, Daniel wrestled with the impossible choice before him. He sought advice from friends, but none of them truly understood the depth of his bond with Emily. He spent sleepless nights imagining life without her, wondering if pursuing his dream was worth the cost. In the end, the pressure from the industry and the fear of losing this rare opportunity pushed him to a painful decision. One evening, Daniel met Emily at a quiet cafe, his face drawn and eyes tired. He struggled to maintain his composure as he broke the news. "I got the role," he said slowly, watching Emily's face light up before he continued. "But there's a condition." Emily's joy quickly faded, replaced by confusion. "What kind of condition?" Daniel took a deep breath, his voice heavy with regret. "They want full commitment, no distractions. That means us." The words hung in the air, a brutal echo of the sacrifice he was about to make. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You're choosing them?" she whispered, disbelief mingling with heartbreak. "I don't want to, but I have to," he replied, his voice breaking. As Daniel walked away that night, he felt as though he was leaving a part of himself behind. Emily sat in her dimly lit apartment, trying to process the devastation that had just unfolded. The love that had brought her so much joy had now become a source of unbearable pain. She replayed Daniel's words in her mind, searching for some hidden logic that might ease the hurt. But his decision felt final, cold even. The days that followed were a blur of routine and numbness. At the restaurant, Emily forced herself to maintain her professional composure, but her movements were robotic. Her once joyful cooking was now simply a necessity, a way to keep her mind from spiraling further into despair. Yet, as she plated each dish with precision, there was a bitterness beneath the surface. It was as if every sautéed vegetable, every drizzle of sauce, was an act of defiance against the emptiness Daniel had left behind. Daniel, meanwhile, was immersed in his new role. The energy of Hollywood was electric, and for a while, it kept him from fully feeling the consequences of his choice. But late at night, in the quiet of his temporary apartment, he found himself staring at his phone, resisting the urge to call Emily. The success he had longed for now seemed hollow, devoid of the one person who had believed in him unconditionally. One evening, Emily's emotions reached a breaking point. After a busy night at the restaurant, she collapsed into a chair, her tears finally breaking free. She was angry at Daniel for leaving, angry at the world for forcing him to choose, and angry at herself for still loving him. She grabbed a notebook from the kitchen counter, scribbling down new recipes with ferocious intensity. "If this is all I have left, then I'll make it matter," she muttered to herself, her voice a mix of determination and heartbreak. Despite the pain, Emily resolved to channel her grief into her craft. The restaurant became her refuge and the kitchen, her battleground. She vowed to make her culinary dreams come true, even if it meant moving forward without the person who had once been her greatest support. Months passed, and Emily's relentless dedication began to yield results. The restaurant was thriving, filled with diners eager to try her bold, innovative dishes. Her culinary skills had reached new heights, and the pain of losing Daniel had slowly morphed into a driving force that propelled her forward. It was a bittersweet triumph, tinged with the absence of the person who had once inspired her most. One evening, Emily stood on stage at a prestigious culinary awards ceremony, holding the trophy that symbolized her hard-earned success. She gave a heartfelt speech, acknowledging her team and the struggles that had brought her to this moment. The applause was deafening, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt truly accomplished. Yet, in the midst of the celebration, she couldn't shake the feeling of something missing. As the crowd dispersed, an older man approached her, a prominent investor who had played a role in the restaurant's expansion. "Congratulations, Emily. You've earned every bit of this success," he said warmly. "Thank you," Emily replied with a grateful smile. But then the man's tone shifted to something more personal. "It's interesting, really, how you and Daniel both managed to rise despite the odds. It's not often you see that kind of sacrifice pay off." Emily's brows furrowed. "Sacrifice? What do you mean?" The man paused, sensing her confusion. "I thought you knew. The production company funding Daniel's film is connected to our investors. When they backed your restaurant, it was under the condition that Daniel wouldn't have any personal distractions. Emily felt her legs weaken, her breath catching in her throat. The truth hit her like a wave. Daniel hadn't left her out of ambition. He had sacrificed their love to ensure both their futures. Her heart ached with a mix of relief, anger, and deep sadness. That night, as Emily sat alone in her apartment, she allowed herself to cry, not just for the love lost, but for the realization of what Daniel had truly done for her. It was a bittersweet clarity, filled with gratitude and a lingering sense of heartbreak. She finally understood the magnitude of Daniel's sacrifice, and with it came a sense of closure she had never expected. Years later, the city felt both familiar and distant. Emily had become a renowned chef, with her restaurant now a destination for food enthusiasts from far and wide. Though time had softened the pain, memories of Daniel still lingered in the corners of her mind, nostalgic, yet no longer overwhelming. One crisp autumn evening, Emily attended a charity gala supporting local arts and small businesses, a cause close to her heart. As she mingled with the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, her gaze suddenly fell on a familiar face. It was Daniel, standing a few feet away, looking older and more refined, but unmistakably the man she had once loved. Emily's heart raced, a mix of shock and old feelings rushing back. Before she could turn away, Daniel spotted her and approached with a cautious smile. "Emily," he said gently, as if testing the weight of her name after so many years. "Daniel," she replied, her voice calm but laced with emotion. The initial awkwardness was palpable, but as they began to talk, the years apart seemed to fade. They exchanged pleasantries, how Emily's restaurant had won more awards, how Daniel had landed significant roles and grown as an actor. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a deep, unspoken current of what had been left unresolved. They soon found a quieter corner of the venue, away from the crowd, and sat down. After a pause, Emily broke the silence. "I know the truth now," she said softly. "About why you left." Daniel's eyes softened, filled with a mixture of regret and relief. "I always hoped you'd understand someday," he admitted. "It was never about choosing success over you, Emily. It was about giving us both a chance to have the lives we dreamed of, even if it meant losing each other." The moment was heavy with emotion, anger, forgiveness, and a lingering affection that time hadn't entirely erased. Emily's gaze was steady, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I wish you hadn't made that decision for me, but I understand now." They sat in reflective silence, acknowledging the love that had once been powerful, flawed, and still, in some way, enduring. There was no promise of rekindling romance, but there was a profound sense of acceptance, a shared recognition of what they had lost and gained. Emily and Daniel stood side by side under the soft glow of the gala lights, their conversation shifting from heavy confessions to lighter memories. There was an unexpected ease between them, a reminder of the connection they once had, now transformed by time and maturity. The pain that had once defined their relationship had evolved into a deeper understanding, one that carried both the weight of the past and the promise of peace. As the event continued, they moved to a quieter terrace, overlooking the city's twinkling skyline. Emily leaned against the railing, her expression thoughtful. "It's funny," she said, breaking the silence. "All this time I thought I had to let go of what we had to move forward. But maybe, it's more about accepting it." Daniel nodded, his voice low but steady. "I've thought the same. I spent so long convincing myself that sacrificing us was the right thing. But it wasn't my decision to make alone." Emily turned to face him, her gaze softer now. "I understand why you did it, Daniel. I just wish you had trusted me enough to let me make that choice with you." There was a pause, filled with an unspoken regret that no words could truly resolve. But there was also a sense of relief, as if acknowledging their mistakes was enough to finally close that chapter. They both smiled, not with the longing of lovers hoping to rekindle a romance, but with the warmth of two people who had grown and learned. "We may not have ended up together," Emily said, her voice filled with a quiet strength, "but we became who we were meant to be, partly because of each other." Daniel reached out, taking her hand for a brief, meaningful moment. "I'm grateful for what we had, Emily," he said sincerely. "And for who you are now." Emily squeezed his hand gently before letting go. "Me too," she replied, a hint of a tear in her eye, but her smile genuine. As they parted ways, it wasn't with sadness, but with a shared sense of closure. Their story, once defined by sacrifice and ambition, was now marked by gratitude and acceptance. Whatever the future held, they both felt ready to embrace it, separately, yet forever connected by the love they once shared.